Before I met Katie, I was really just going through the motions of church. I was going to church every Sunday. I was a good Christian, how I should be a Christian. But my relationship with God, I felt like God was almost impersonal, that he just wanted obligation, and God just wanted you to fulfill your quota of what you had to do. I mean, God has a mandate, and he expects you to go to church. He expects you to do good. He expects you to be a good person. Through my experience becoming, a more in-depth Christian, I really got to experience God's radical generosity and realize that God wanted good things for me and that he was absolutely generous to me, and that it wasn't my duty to do what God wanted, but it was my privilege. It was, what a good relationship is. I really feel like I embraced my Christianity when I was about to get married and when I met my wife's family, and seeing how they reacted towards their son Tony, and how they fully embraced him as part of their own family, even though he wasn't biologically from their family. I remember in that moment just realizing how much God had given to me that I didn't need, and how much extra I had, even though at the time I may have felt poor or felt as if I was going from bill to bill. But that actually genuinely created a good relationship between God and I, where I felt like God didn't need my stuff, but God did want me and wanted my heart to change. God moves me outside of my comfort zone constantly. And, adoption was one of those things where I really had to step out and be challenged, not through the concept of adoption. I said, okay, that's a biblical thing. God says, take care of the widows and orphans. That's pretty, in my mind, it almost feels like an obligation. But through that process, I learned something different. Like, it wasn't an obligation. It was an act of love that I could have for God. And as we are God's adopted, we want to adopt. We want to build a family through adoption. And the biological issues, like genetically speaking, that's the least you pass on to your kids is your genetics. So through the process of adoption, I learned what it meant to be God's adopted even more so. One of the most vivid memories of my life, weeks of my life, is when I had to decide to actually adopt. We were licensed through Hamilton County to get a kid, and we got a call for a healthy baby girl. Katie and I were both super excited, and we're like, man, this is our first call. We're gonna have our first baby. So I actually left work early to get home so we could call the county back in time and say, hey, hook us up with this baby girl. And the county had said, oh no, she's already been placed. Through that, and praying through that, and talking to God through that, we felt like on our hearts that, God had more for us. God says we can handle more. We didn't even know what that meant. And then it was 4 days later, on a Friday, we got a call for Elijah. He was an unhealthy baby boy. He was born with lack of oxygen to the brain for 18 minutes, and he was born drug addicted. And Elijah was inevitably terminally ill, and his spinal cord was deteriorating. And we had to decide whether or not we wanted to take on a terminally ill child as our own and have him in our home and experience the loss of our first child. I felt blindsided by that. I look forward to retirement. I look forward to, playing baseball with my kids and, things like that. Not like, you don't choose to have a baby that's gonna die or be unhealthy in any way. Through all that, I was praying at a weekend service I was going to, and I felt like God tell me, I'll heal your son, so I'll heal your boy. And so that was it. So we decided that through that we wanted to take on Elijah. So there were complications with taking on Elijah because of our age, because of, you know, our medical experience. The county said because of his impending death, they were going to have an investigation, and if he was in our home, we would be investigated and possibly criminally charged for his death because he's in our home and he's a foster son. So all those things weighed on me through that decision, but ultimately we decided we wanted him. So on Monday morning, we called the county, and he was still available. Nobody else had taken him over the weekend, and so we went to go meet our son later that day.
You're not just gonna relax?
He's like, I know where we got.
Just relax.
Our biggest thing that we could do for him is pray for him and care for him and love him. And we said, hey, look, if this boy's only going to be here for 2 weeks to a month, we're going to love him more than any person has ever loved a human. And we're just going to hold him constantly, and we're going to take care of him. And he's going to have the best 2 weeks of his life. I specifically remember praying for him one night. We had measured his head the night before, and we laid our hands on him. We were praying for his head, and his skull actually popped. His skull came apart, and his head grew 6 centimeters within 1 day. So his growth chart hopped on the scale. I still think Elijah's going to be healed more than he is now. I feel like I got a piece of that promise at that time that God had given me, that I'll heal your son. From that point on, we realized that God really can do anything. I mean, we saw a miracle happen in Elijah's healing, and him being 5, that's insane. It really put a different perspective on how we thought about God and his power and his love. He can take anything and make it something that he wants in whatever condition that he has. God has made Elijah he taught me how to love, and he taught me what it was like to be that adopted child and to have ownership of my identity. So I feel like God put that on my heart to seek after the kids that are harder to place, that are harder to find a home for. It really changed my perspective when I wanted to adopt in the future, that we wanted to focus on medical and special needs. I'm just trying to do what my father's doing. Really, I just try to mimic what I've seen God do for me, done for Elijah, done for my wife. Completely changed me. After I had Elijah for a little bit, I decided that I wanted a back tattoo. It's a picture version of what Romans 8 is. And it's my identity, and it's my family's identity about adoption and through adoption. We're God's. We're God's inheritance. We're God's people. We're heirs to the throne. So I really embrace that, having adopted and having known all of my kids and their experiences. But Elijah especially really had that identity come home, so that I knew that that was never going to change in my life, and I always have that identity. So I wanted to put it on me in a way that it was a permanent part of my life. I feel like God fathers us in the same way as I fathered Elijah in that 2 weeks. Just he does it more constantly, more consistently, more abundantly even than that. In the same way, you know, I maybe stepped up and I was the best father ever for 2 weeks for my boy. God's that way consistently for us. Like, we can rely on that even more so than anyone else stepping in ever. I mean, nobody's going to treat us or love us the way that God does. So passionately and consistently, more than anything, abundant love.